In today's video, we're looking at criminals who were eaten alive by deadly animals, from a Bengal tiger's silent hunt in the Sundarbans mangroves to a horrifying grizzly assault in the wilderness of Montana. But first, we start in Botswana, where murky border channels concealed predators that had perfected their hunting techniques over millions of years. It was June 2016 in the Okavango Delta of Botswana, where the border flood channels carved through dense papyrus reeds and muddy banks. The water moved slowly here, dark and opaque, reflecting the overcast sky above. Wildlife warnings dotted the area, faded signs nailed to trees that most locals heeded. Rangers had noted stripped animal carcasses along these same banks for months, evidence of feeding activity that made the channels particularly dangerous after dusk. The landscape was deceptively beautiful, with lily pads floating on the surface and birds calling from the reeds. But beneath that tranquil exterior lurked predators that had perfected their hunting techniques over millions of years. Jethro Vosh was 34 years old, a former dockhand who had traded legitimate work for the lucrative ivory trade. Operating alone kept him off the radar, avoiding the exposure that came with partners or crews. He used unregistered skiffs to move elephant tusks across the shallow border channels, timing his runs between patrol shifts when enforcement was thinnest. Upstream, he had established a decoy campsite complete with burned trash and boot prints, a false trail designed to pull attention away from his real operation. The deception had worked for months, giving him confidence that bordered on recklessness. His method was efficient and well-practiced. Tie ivory bundles to submerged roots along the waterline, then return later for pickup when the coast was clear. Rope, knives, and flotation sacks stayed hidden in the reeds, ready for the next run. He had mapped the channel carefully, noting depths and patrol patterns, believing he had accounted for every variable. What he had not accounted for was the wildlife that considered these waters their hunting grounds. The channels provided perfect conditions for ambush predators, with murky water concealing movement and abundant prey drawing them in regularly. The Nile crocodile is Africa's largest freshwater predator, reaching lengths of over 16 feet and weighing up to a ton. They are ambush hunters, capable of remaining motionless for hours beneath the surface, only their eyes and nostrils breaking the waterline. Their bite force is among the strongest ever recorded in the animal kingdom, powerful enough to crush bone instantly and hold prey in an inescapable grip. They hunt by explosive acceleration, closing the distance to prey in seconds, then using a technique called the death roll to disorient and drown their victims. In channels like these, where visibility is poor and vegetation provides cover, crocodiles hold every advantage. They are opportunistic feeders, drawn to any disturbance in the water, and blood in the water often attracts multiple individuals to compete over a kill. The stripped carcasses the Rangers had found were testament to their efficiency and their presence in these exact waters. That evening, Jethro made his approach as the sun dropped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the channel. He had completed several short unloading runs already, moving quickly to avoid detection. The work was going smoothly, each bundle secured and hidden as planned. One crate had snagged on submerged roots near the bank, the rope tangled in the underwater vegetation. Rather than leave it and risk discovery, he waded in waist-deep to free it, the water cold and murky around him. His hands worked at the knot, focused on the task, unaware of the eyes watching from the reeds. He did not see the ripples approaching, the subtle V-shaped wake that signaled an incoming predator. The crocodile surfaced without warning, its body cutting through the water in near silence. It struck low, jaws clamping around his lower leg with crushing force. Teeth punctured through muscle and scraped bone as the crocodile pulled backward, dragging him off balance into deeper water. He went under immediately, arms flailing, trying to grab at anything solid. The crocodile began to roll, spinning its body with mechanical efficiency. The motion was disorienting and brutal, the world becoming a chaos of dark water and white foam as he was pulled deeper with each rotation. Water filled his lungs as he was dragged under repeatedly, each surfacing shorter than the last, each breath more desperate and incomplete. The crocodile's jaws remained locked on his leg, the grip unbreakable, the teeth grinding against bone with every twist. His left shoulder dislocated as he thrashed against the roll, the joint popping as the arm wrenched at an unnatural angle. The death roll continued with relentless force, tearing tissue and breaking joints, his body becoming a rag doll in the predator's jaws. The pain was overwhelming at first, sharp and all-consuming, but as oxygen deprivation set in, his awareness began to fade, the edges of his vision darkening even in the brief moments his face broke the surface. Blood spread through the water, a dark plume clouding the channel and drifting downstream with the current. The struggling grew weaker as drowning took hold. his movements becoming sporadic and uncoordinated. Within minutes, his body went limp, no longer offering resistance. The crocodile dragged him deeper, away from the surface and into the darker water near the channel bottom, where the roots and vegetation provided cover for feeding. Other crocodiles arrived soon after, drawn by the blood and the commotion. They began to compete over the carcass, tearing at the remains with powerful headshakes and violent twisting motions. Limbs were pulled away as the crocodiles braced against each other for leverage, each claiming portions of the kill. The feeding continued through the night, the water churning intermittently as the predators returned to feed and drag pieces into deeper channels for storage. The sound of tearing flesh and snapping bone echoed faintly across the water, unheard by anyone in the remote darkness. By morning, scattered debris floated near the bank, drifting slowly downstream with the current. Bone fragments and torn fabric caught in the reeds marked where the attack had occurred. The ivory crate he had died trying to retrieve was gone, either sunk or carried away. Soft tissue had been consumed, but partial remains lay wedged beneath submerged roots and scattered along the muddy bottom, evidence that would disperse further as scavengers and the current continued their work. The missing person report came 36 hours later, filed through a paid intermediary who provided minimal details and false information about his last known location. A GPS tracker had been planted on a separate skiff, diverting patrols to a different section of the delta entirely, buying time for evidence to disperse. Wildlife authorities and maritime police each assumed the other had jurisdiction over the border channel, and the delay allowed the scene to disperse naturally. When rangers finally arrived, they found the stage campsite upstream, but little else of value. The ivory bundles were gone, cut loose or claimed by the current, and the operation's full scope remained unclear. Jethro's family released a brief statement expressing grief, but offered no details about his activities or the circumstances that had brought him to the Delta. Publicly, the case was logged as a wildlife fatality in a restricted zone. Another cautionary tale about ignoring posted warnings. The ivory operation he had been running quietly dissolved, his contacts moving on without acknowledgement, the network adapting and continuing elsewhere. But Jethro Vosch was not the only criminal to vanish in a remote and hostile environment that year. Hundreds of miles away, in the tidal mangrove forests along the India-Bangladesh border, another smuggler was preparing for a nighttime crossing through terrain even more unforgiving. Sela Prent was 29. A courier guiding drug runners through waterlogged trails where the jungle itself seemed to watch and wait, and where an apex predator stalked with patience and precision. It was September 2017 in the Sundarbans mangrove forest along the India-Bangladesh border, where tidal channels wound through dense vegetation, and muddy embankments shifted with each flood cycle. The air hung thick with humidity, and the smell of salt and decay, while the canopy above filtered sunlight into dappled patterns on the water below. This was one of the world's largest mangrove forests, a maze of waterways and islands where borders blurred and enforcement was sporadic. Fresh pug marks pressed into the mud told of recent tiger activity, and local fishermen had reported livestock kills along the very routes that smugglers favored for their crossings. Sela Prent was 29 years old, a seasoned courier who specialized in guiding nighttime drug crossings through these treacherous tidal mangroves. She had built a reputation for speed and reliability, moving contraband when other guides refused to operate. Her method relied on separation and quick movement to avoid the joint patrols that occasionally swept the area. Tonight, she was leading 3 other smugglers through a route she had used dozens of times successfully before. Waterproof packets containing narcotics were strapped to their bodies, ready for handoff to contacts waiting across the border. The group carried signal mirrors to coordinate with river pickup boats, and they had strategically placed noisemakers tied to trees away from their actual path to confuse any pursuing forces. The plan was methodical and well-rehearsed. Cash had already been exchanged mid-route, confirming the transaction and commitment from all parties. They moved in single file along narrow embankments that rose just above the high tide line, following paths that local wildlife had carved through the mangroves over generations. The route took them through prime hunting territory, but Sela had always relied on group movement and noise to deter any large predators. What she had not anticipated was the need to scout ahead alone, breaking the one rule that had kept her alive through years of dangerous crossings. The Bengal tiger is the apex predator of the Sundarbans, perfectly adapted to this aquatic environment. Unlike other tiger subspecies, Bengal tigers are excellent swimmers and actively hunt in water, making them uniquely dangerous in mangrove terrain. Sundarbans tigers typically weigh between 300 and 450 pounds and measure over 9 feet in length, with powerful limbs capable of bringing down prey much larger than themselves. Their hunting strategy relies on stealth and ambush, using the dense vegetation for cover, while stalking prey along predictable routes. Tigers possess exceptional night vision and hearing, allowing them to detect movement from considerable distances. Their canine teeth extend nearly 4 inches and are capable of puncturing vertebrae and major blood vessels with devastating efficiency. In the Sundarbans, tigers have adapted their hunting patterns to the tidal cycles, often positioning themselves along embankments where prey is forced to travel in predictable patterns. As the group approached a narrow section of the route, Sela made the decision to scout ahead alone. The embankment narrowed to less than 3 feet wide, with deep water on both sides and thick vegetation pressing in from above. She wanted to ensure the path was clear before bringing the others through the bottleneck. Moving quietly along the muddy trail, she focused on the route ahead, watching for patrol boats or other signs of enforcement activity. The mangroves around her were alive with the sounds of insects and water lapping against roots, masking any other movement in the area. The tiger had been tracking the group, moving parallel to their route through the dense vegetation. It had positioned itself along the narrow embankment, using a fallen tree as cover while waiting for an opportunity. When Sela separated from the group and approached alone, the predator recognized the perfect moment to strike. The attack came from behind, explosive and nearly silent. The tiger emerged from cover and struck with devastating force, its full weight driving Sela forward onto the muddy embankment. Massive paws slammed into her back, claws extending to grip and hold as the impact drove the air from her lungs. Before she could call out, powerful jaws closed around her neck from behind, 4-inch canines sinking deep into tissue. The tiger's bite crushed down with tremendous pressure, puncturing through muscle to collapse her trachea and sever the major blood vessels running through her neck. Her attempt to struggle produced only a choked gasp, the sound immediately swallowed by the ambient noise of the mangroves. The tiger's weight, over 400 pounds of muscle and bone, pinned her completely to the ground as the killing bite was maintained. Blood flow to her brain ceased within seconds as the carotid arteries were compressed and torn. Her movements weakened rapidly, consciousness fading as oxygen deprivation took hold. The predator's breathing remained controlled and steady, showing no signs of exertion despite the violence of the attack. Within 30 seconds, her body had gone still. After confirming the kill, the tiger began to drag its prey into the dense brush away from the trail. Powerful neck muscles pulled the body through the vegetation, leaving deep drag marks in the mud and scattered pieces of gear caught on branches. The tiger moved with purpose, taking its kill to a secluded feeding site where it could consume the meal without interruption. The entire attack had lasted less than a minute, occurring with only the briefest sounds of struggle that never carried beyond the immediate area. The other smugglers waited at the bottleneck for over an hour before realizing Sela was not returning. Rather than search for her and risk their own capture, they completed the crossing and falsely reported a successful operation to their handlers. The tides erased most footprints within hours, and the dense vegetation concealed any obvious signs of struggle. Indian patrols stopped their search at the border markers, while Bangladeshi units were not notified of the missing person for several days, allowing crucial evidence to disappear. When authorities finally organized a search, they found only scattered gear and the drag marks leading into impenetrable brush. The tiger had moved the remains deep into its territory, where recovery was impossible without significant risk to search teams. Sela's family was informed that she had disappeared during illegal border activity, but no details were provided about the circumstances. The drug operation continued with a new courier, adapting quickly to the loss. The case was quietly classified as a wildlife fatality in a restricted border zone, joining dozens of similar incidents that occurred annually in the Sundarbans. Local communities expressed little surprise, knowing that the mangroves claimed both criminals and innocents with equal efficiency. The smuggling networks operating in the region had long factored such losses into their calculations, treating couriers as expendable assets in a business where danger came not only from law enforcement, but from the natural environment itself. Tigers in the Sundarbans had killed hundreds of people over the decades, their hunting behavior shaped by generations of adaptation to human presence in their territory. While Sela Prent had vanished in the humid darkness of the mangroves, another criminal was establishing his operations in an entirely different environment. In the mountains of western Montana, Cormac Droob was preparing to hide stolen firearms in a remote cabin, unaware that he was entering territory claimed by one of North America's most powerful predators during its most dangerous season. It was April 2015 in the remote wilderness of western Montana, where snow still clung to the higher elevations, and early spring had awakened the forest from its winter dormancy. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by dense pine and fir trees, accessible only by a rough dirt road that became impassable during heavy weather. This was bear country, part of a natural corridor that connected feeding areas across the mountain range. Recent reports from the area included overturned trash cans, clawed trees with bark stripped away, and fresh scat along the trails. The cabin itself was registered under the name of a deceased relative, providing perfect cover for illegal activities while remaining off the radar of law enforcement agencies. Cormac Droob was 41 years old, a career burglar who had spent the better part of 2 decades perfecting his craft. He specialized in high-value items that could be easily transported and resold, with firearms being his preferred target due to their consistent demand and compact size. His latest operation had netted him over 30 weapons from a series of residential break-ins across 3 counties. The cabin served as his staging area, a place where he could modify the weapons by filing down serial numbers and prepare them for sale to black market contacts. His partner had already departed with a stolen vehicle, driving it to another state where it would be abandoned to create a false trail for investigators. The location was ideal for his purposes, isolated enough to work without interruption while providing multiple escape routes through the forest. He had been using the cabin for several months, storing cash and weapons while building his network of buyers. What he had not considered was that early spring was the most dangerous time to be in bear habitat. After months of hibernation, bears emerged hungry and aggressive, searching for any available food source to rebuild their depleted fat reserves. The area around the cabin showed clear signs of recent bear activity, but Cormac had dismissed these warnings as irrelevant to his operation. The American grizzly bear is one of North America's most formidable predators, capable of weighing over 800 pounds and standing nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder. During early spring emergence from hibernation, grizzlies are at their most dangerous, driven by intense hunger after months without food. Their sense of smell is among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, capable of detecting scents from miles away. Grizzlies can run at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour, faster than any human, and their powerful limbs can deliver blows with the force of a sledgehammer. Their claws extend up to 4 inches and are designed for digging and tearing, while their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch. A food-conditioned bear, one that has learned to associate human presence with easy meals, becomes especially dangerous, losing its natural wariness and actively seeking out human food sources with predatory intent. On his final night at the cabin, Cormac had laid out the firearms across a makeshift table, organizing them by type and condition. Serial numbers were filed down using metal tools. The shavings were scattered across the floor. Cash from previous sales was counted and bundled, then buried near the cabin foundation for later retrieval. He had grown careless with food storage, leaving meat scraps outside overnight rather than properly securing them. The scent carried through the forest, advertising his presence to every predator in the area. As dawn approached, Cormac prepared to leave the cabin and return to civilization. He stepped outside into the cool morning air, unaware that a massive grizzly bear had been drawn to the area by the food scents. The bear had become food-conditioned over recent weeks, learning that the cabin meant an easy meal. It had spent the night investigating the cabin perimeter, growing increasingly bold as it detected the promise of food. The bear was moving around the structure's exterior, following scent trails and searching for the source when Cormac emerged. The encounter came suddenly as Cormac rounded the corner of the cabin. The grizzly was less than 20 feet away, actively investigating the area where food scraps had been discarded. The bear's head swung toward him, nostrils flaring as it processed his sudden appearance. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then the bear charged, its food-conditioned behavior overriding any natural wariness. The distance closed in seconds with explosive speed, over 600 pounds of muscle and bone covering the ground faster than any human could react. The initial strike came from a massive forepaw, claws extended, that caught him across the chest and shoulder. The force of the blow lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing to the ground, ribs cracking under the impact. Before he could attempt to rise, the bear was on top of him, using its full weight to pin him against the earth. Powerful jaws closed around his neck and shoulder, canine teeth puncturing deep into flesh and severing critical blood vessels. The bear shook its head violently, the motion tearing muscle and opening massive wounds. Another crushing blow from the bear's forepaw struck his head and face, the sledgehammer force causing devastating trauma. His left arm was caught in the bear's mouth as he instinctively tried to protect himself, bones cracking under the pressure as the bear bit down. The grizzly maintained its assault on his neck and upper torso, delivering crushing bites that caused catastrophic damage to tissue and major arteries. Blood loss was rapid and severe, pooling beneath his body as the bear continued its attack. The bear used its forelimbs to maintain dominance, its claws tearing through clothing and flesh. The assault continued until all movement stopped. As a food-conditioned predator that had lost its natural fear of humans, the grizzly began feeding immediately, using its powerful jaws and claws to access the body. The feeding continued for several hours, with the bear consuming portions before moving the remains to a more secluded location deeper in the forest. The investigation began 3 days later when Cormac failed to meet his contact for a planned weapons sale. His partner, already in another state, provided false information about their last known activities, claiming they had been planning a job in a distant city. A false tip was called in about a gun deal gone wrong, sending investigators in the wrong direction and buying time for evidence at the cabin to deteriorate. County sheriff's deputies handled the theft investigation, while wildlife officers dealt with the bear activity separately, creating jurisdictional confusion that delayed the discovery of the scene. When authorities finally reached the cabin, they found the scattered weapons and evidence of the illegal operation, but Cormac's remains were discovered nearly a quarter-mile away in dense forest. The bear had cached parts of the body according to its natural feeding behavior, making recovery difficult and traumatic for the search teams. Wildlife officials confirmed grisly involvement through tracks, scat analysis, and feeding patterns found at the scene. The immediate feeding and caching behavior indicated a food-conditioned bear, rather than a defensive attack. Cormac's family released a brief statement acknowledging his death, but declined to comment on the circumstances surrounding his illegal activities. The weapons recovery led to the closure of several related cases, but many of the firearms were never found, presumably sold before his death. The bear responsible was not located or destroyed, as officials determined it had been acting according to natural predatory behavior after becoming conditioned to human food sources. The case highlighted the dangers of operating in remote wilderness areas during critical wildlife periods, but it did little to deter other criminals from using similar locations. The cabin was eventually demolished, but the area remained attractive to those seeking isolation for illegal activities. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.